Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I want to send you loads and loads of love, and thank you for joining me this evening. And if you love great stories and you love cryptid animals like Bigfoot, then this definitely is the channel for you. So make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and click the thumbs up. Let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, my name is Esther, and I'm initially from Philadelphia, and my bizarre encounter happened in 1996. But the perplexing question I have that I still cannot answer to this day was this terrifying beast that actually hounded my family a Bigfoot, or wasn't it? This mystery is one that I may never be able to answer, and it hangs over my life with a cloud of uncertainty, because I've always hated not having a solution for a problem or an answer to a question. And to this day, I have no idea what we encountered. My story begins in 1992. My husband and I had decided to buy a large plot of land at the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. We chose the perfect idyllic location for our home. The building involved a mammoth task, bringing down large trees, bulldozing and flattening the land. I designed the house myself from scratch. I wanted to create a very large, spacious, traditional style farmhouse with wide windows, whitewashed walls, a charcoal slate roof, and a very large wooden deck for entertaining purposes. My plan rolled into action, and I was very excited about the project. It took us 3 whole years to finally build the home, so we were only relocated from Philadelphia once our house was actually completed in the summer of 1995. I had no idea it would take this long. I had never lived in the country before, but my husband and I dreamed of raising our 2 sons in a rural environment where they could grow up with the fresh air blowing against their faces and become more acquainted and attuned with the natural world, such as plants, animals, and birds. I really thought that it would be an inspiration for them to become more resourceful and independent as young men. Finally, the day arrived for the great move to take place, and my sons were enthralled and excited about the whole idea of a brand new life in the country. I had promised them that we would raise horses, chickens, goats, and a couple of pigs, and my children were over the moon about the prospect of owning their own animals. My son Dylan was 11 at the time, and Niles was 12. It was so exciting settling down into our new home and transforming it into a cosy family den with snug furnishings, cosy large fireplaces, and a country-style kitchen that I'd always dreamed of. I also prepared my own little kitchen garden with herbs, vegetables, and beautiful flowers. My husband was able to find work locally, and it was decided that I would stay at home to raise the kids, something I'd always longed to do. In Philadelphia, I had worked as a secretary for a financial advisor, so I had no regrets of leaving that life behind. But even so, moving to the country was not without its challenges and was a huge adjustment for me. I had always been a very social, outgoing kind of person, so invariably there were times when loneliness set in, and there were times that I got very down. The first year in our new home was a major adjustment for my husband and I, but the kids were so resilient and settled down exceedingly quickly. As I had promised, we got 3 goats, 2 horses, 2 pigs, and several dozen free-range chickens. And I also acquired a very cute white fluffy elderly dog called Maya that I rescued from a shelter, and she just followed me everywhere, becoming a devoted, constant companion for me. My 2 sons would spend their lives playing out in the woods. They just loved it out there. They would ride their bicycles, play with BB guns, engage in all kinds of boyish games and funny pranks. My boys developed a huge passion for photographing unusual birds, and so they began to spend a lot of time bird watching, so they always carried a bird book with them and a pair of binoculars. One day in the summer of 1996, they decided to set up a tent in the woods as a place where they could hang out and play. It was that day that would bring about an event that would ultimately change our lives forever, and there would be no turning back. As my children were pitching their tents in the wood, they suddenly sensed that something was watching them, and whatever it was, it made them feel distinctly uneasy and sent chills of terror down their spines. They also noticed that the forest had become eerily quiet, and the natural chirping bird song had all but receded, which they found exceedingly odd. My son even described the wind taking on a menacing ambience, and also the forest as becoming almost unfriendly and hostile towards them. They looked around but could not see anything, and then suddenly they detected a movement high up on one of the trees. My older son reached for his binoculars to have a better view of what it was, and he almost dropped them in horror, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing with his eyes. Standing there on an extended tree branch, staring down at them with huge blazing red eyes, was an 8-foot giant-like humanoid monkey, weighing about 600 pounds. He was covered from head to foot with dark, black, matted-looking hair that was both messy and unkempt. The hairless face was exceedingly black, so black that it made the facial features of this thing, whatever it was, almost non-distinguishable. The creature had exceedingly long arms and black hands, but the sharp-pointed nails were like eagle's talons, and the creature had a very long tail. The hairy humanoid monkey swayed on the tree provocatively, from side to side, as he stood on the branch, staring at my children with demonic red, taunting eyes that ravaged their hearts with a very palpable fear. In terror, my older son screamed out to his brother, "Run! Run! Run! As fast as you can! Run!" And both my boys sprinted out of the woods as fast as their legs could carry them. They heard this monstrous beast jump off the branch onto the forest floor with such a force they even felt the heavy vibration under their feet as this demonic beast chased after them at a very vast speed. My youngest son told me that his legs felt like they were giving way beneath him as he ran, and he was so numb by a paralyzing fear that was unlike anything he had ever experienced in his entire life. I was making strawberry jam on the gas hob of my cooker at the time, when I heard the front door crashing open as my boys bounded into the house and bolted into my kitchen, with faces as white as sheets and eyes as wide as saucers. I could sense my children's palpable terror as they revealed to me that they had witnessed a huge monkey-like monster in the woods. I knew my children were not prone to making up stories like this, but I have to confess it was very difficult for me to digest such a scenario. It seemed so implausible and so far-fetched. Even my husband was so dismissive of my kids' claims and believed it had possibly been a case of misidentification and that they had stumbled upon a black bear and highly exaggerated their encounter. Our parental responses to our children's wild claims did cause my kids deep frustration. They were adamant about what they had seen. When they told a couple of kids at the local school what they had encountered, they were teased relentlessly. So I noticed my kids became very subdued, and they never ventured to play in the woods. Instead, their games outside were relegated to our yard, which was in very close proximity to our front door. Despite my efforts to encourage them to explore the woods again, they avoided the area like the plague and simply refused to go near them. I imagine that tent could still be parked out there to this very day. One morning I was outside in the yard, hanging our family washing on the line, when I felt that something hostile was watching me. I imagine this is how a deer feels when they sense that a predator is around. The only way I can describe it is that you just know instinctively that you are not alone. It was a beautiful sunny day, and as my eyes surveyed the whole area around my home, I saw absolutely nothing. But I felt such a menacing presence that the hairs on the neck just stood up on end, and I hurriedly retreated back into my home. That evening I told my husband about my creepy, surreal experience, and he told me that my kid's encounter with the hairy monkey was feeding my imagination with crazy, wild ideas. I hoped he was right, and I wanted to believe him, but I knew that what I'd experienced that day was hauntingly real. Even little Maya, my white-haired little mutt, refused to go outside on that occasion. She had appeared anxious and frightened, with her tail tucked between her legs, which was so unusual for her. She retreated to a little dark corner in the side of our refrigerator and remained hidden in that spot for almost the whole day. One night I woke up to the frightened squeaks, squawks, grunts, bleats and oinks from all our farm animals that we owned, making the most terrifying sounds, almost as if they were being hunted down by a predator. I could hear the sounds of our two normally very docile, easy-going mares neighing frantically and pounding the stables with their hooves. My husband raced hurriedly out of the house, armed with his rifle and a flashlight, and was convinced when he ventured outside that he'd heard something very heavy bolting back into the woods at a thunderous speed. The next morning we woke up to find that several of our chickens had been beheaded and their heads were scattered over our yard like confetti, and only a couple of the bodies had even been snatched. So whatever this thing was, it clearly enjoyed terrorizing my farm animals just for fun, as if it was a game for him. Naturally, I was very concerned by what was going on, and my kids were totally convinced that all these strange happenings were a result of this mysterious creature that they had encountered in the woods, the monkey man. I was on edge because I truly sensed that my cosy country home lacked the warm, sunny countenance it had once possessed, and seemed as if it was enveloped by a cold, heavy feeling that seemed to coil its way around our home, sucking and draining the life out of my family like a monstrously big boa constrictor. That's exactly what it felt like. One day my husband brought back a carcass of a deer from work, given to him from a family friend who was an avid and keen hunter. We were going to gut, skin and finally store the meat in our deep freezer for future meals. The deer was left on the outside table on our wooden deck just for a moment, and when my husband returned to gut the entire thing, the whole body had just vanished into thin air, which left us wondering who or what had actually done this. Later that week, my husband found all the dead bones of the deer carcass ripped clean, lying on the forest floor, and the skull was perched menacingly on a large tree branch, staring at my husband with its empty, hollowed-out ivory white sockets like something from a sinister horror movie. It was on a Thursday evening when I wondered why my husband had not returned home yet. I was convinced I'd heard his car coming down the long drive, but I knew that I must have imagined it because my husband never appeared. I was not concerned because my husband had told me that he could possibly be late from work that day. But 3 hours later, my husband bolted into the house with a look of total terror on his face. I had never seen him look so horrified in all his life. He was shaking like a leaf and was simply unable to say a word to me. So I took him into my arms and consoled him because I sensed that he had experienced something quite horrific, but I couldn't imagine what. My husband was a very tough guy who did not get anxious easily, so his horrified demeanour really unsettled me. After swigging down several shots of brandy, he finally told me that he'd been driving down our drive, and then he'd pulled over to the side because he thought he'd seen a very large black humanoid hairy form crossing his path. He then decided it must have been a trick of the light, and so he backed his car and then parked it for a moment. He was just about to get out of the car to have a clearer look when suddenly his car was attacked by this monstrously huge creature that pounced on the car roof and literally screamed at him through the window shield, glaring at him ferociously with hauntingly red demonic eyes. He said that this thing was so hugely chilling that he thought it was going to prise him out of his car like a tin opener, and then finally kill him. After a lot of shrill shrieks from the creature, screams and howls, it finally retreated back into the woods, but not until he had accomplished his mission of scaring my husband half to death. The following morning, we discovered that my husband's black car had been scratched very severely by 3 sharp fingernails that had prized off all the black paint like cheap nail varnish, leaving scratches in 3s all over the roof, the doors, and the boot of the car. It had taken a serious beating, as areas of the car had been smashed inwards, forming circular dents in the heavy metal. It looked like my husband had been in a collision on the highway. It was that bad. When my husband took the car to the panel beaters, the guy looked at his car, and his eyes grew as round as saucers, and his chin dropped to the ground, and he said, "What the hell happened here?" And my husband said, "Don't ask, because if you do, you'll never believe me." I think the final straw for us was when my husband and I went to have dinner with newly acquired friends of ours who had lived in the Appalachian Mountains most of their lives. When we shared our intriguing story with them, we were surprised to find that they actually believed us and told us that they knew of all kinds of encounters with strange cryptid-like creatures in the area that go back for hundreds of years. My friend looked at me earnestly and said, "There is something in those woods that can never be explained, and I have seen things there myself that defy rational explanation." I begged her not to tell me her stories because my life was haunted enough, and I didn't need to hear any more. We returned home from our dinner that night to find heavy branches strewn over our entire yard, and a couple of our windows were smashed in with large boulders, and there were carcasses of dead animal skulls hanging all over the awnings, strategically placed to intimidate us. Our farm animals were all in a state of absolute terror, and Maya, my little dog, was curled up in a tiny frightened ball under my bed. I was so glad that my sons had not been home that evening when all this chaos had transpired. The very next day we put our house on the market, gave all our animals to a local farmer we knew well, and literally hightailed back to Philadelphia, leaving pretty much all our worldly possessions behind us, which literally meant the new owners got everything we owned. I did warn them about the monkey man we had seen, and he laughed at me as if I was off my head, and I can't help wondering if he's still laughing now. I was thrilled to get back to Philadelphia, where we rented a place for a while, and became reacquainted with all my friends. I knew that when I went to bed at night, I didn't have to worry about the menacing creature that was lurking in our woods, and for my whole family, that was a welcome relief, and it meant a good night's sleep for all of us. I do not know whether this creature was a Bigfoot or not. Maybe your listeners would know. I'm not sure that it was, because it had a large tail, and its hand had very definite eagle-like talons on the end of its human-like fingers. Its girth was about 3 feet in width, which I imagine is not quite as large as the average Bigfoot. I cannot say that the creature had a cone-shaped head, although it was very large. As for the features of the face, they literally got lost in the darkness of the skin and were hard to distinguish, so I cannot describe them to you. My husband says that the eyes were very blazing traffic light red. Some may say by my description that this creature was a demon or demonic. To look at that would be very plausible, but the trouble is this creature was very physical. I assure you all the prayers in the world did not inhibit or impede this creature in any way. My husband told me that the teeth were much more canine than human-like, and were like white daggers and exceedingly sharp. I do know that Bigfoots do tend to have human-like teeth. So all these years later, we have no explanation about what this monkey creature actually was. And that is my story. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you so very much for your amazing story. I honestly cannot answer that question. I do know that in the Appalachian Mountains, it's the one part of America where there are just so many encounters of very strange creatures. and this may just be one of them. It could be a particular kind of Bigfoot, but as you say, there are things about the creature's description that make me wonder if it is not a completely different creature. So that is a very interesting question, and if anyone listening knows what that creature is, well, I'll pass the message on. Until next time, goodbye and good night.